Hello, my name is Michael Jannett. I am the assistant to the bishop for formation and communication in the Southeastern Synod, and I bring greetings to you on behalf of Bishop Kevin Strickland and the Southeastern Synod staff. The gospel text for Sunday, August 21, Luke chapter 13. Now, Jesus was teaching in one of the synagogues on the Sabbath, and just then there appeared a woman with a spirit that had crippled her for 18 years. She was bent over and was quite unable to stand up straight. When Jesus saw her, he called her over and said, "Woman, you are set free from your ailment." When he laid his hands on her, immediately she stood up straight and began praising God. But the leader of the synagogue, indignant because Jesus had cured on the Sabbath, kept saying to the crowd, "There are 6 days on which work ought to be done. Come on those days and be cured, and not on the Sabbath day." But the Lord answered him and said, "You hypocrites! Does not each one of you on the Sabbath untie his ox or his donkey from the manger and lead it away to give it water? And ought not this woman, a daughter of Abraham, whom Satan bound for 18 long years, be set free from this bondage on the Sabbath day?" When he said this, all his opponents were put to shame, and the entire crowd was rejoicing at all the wonderful things he has done. The Gospel of the Lord. So, traditions. We have lots of them in the church. Whether your church is 2 years old or 200 years old, you have traditions that you like to honor. So I'm curious what some of those are for you. I want you to kind of think about this as we go through our sermon today. What are some of those things that you hold dear as a congregation with traditions, or a ministry with traditions? What are you hoping to pass on to those who come after you? And why do we hold those traditions? I'm sure at the heart of every tradition we hold, there's a good intention. We want to hold on to that which is dear to us and gives us meaning in life and relationship and maybe even hope. Now, as you think about those traditions, I think you probably thought of those traditions because they give you meaning in life and build relationships and give you hope as well. And so traditions can be beautiful and they can bring life, right? I think of myself running around the pews at Trinity Lutheran Church, Holy Trinity Lutheran Church in Hasbrook Heights, New Jersey as a toddler, helping my parents, set up Christmas decorations in the season of Advent and Christmas, and Chrismons on the Christmas tree, and on the Chrismon tree in the sanctuary. And I think of rolling out the dough and making pretzels. I think about the crafts we made over the years and just the smells and the sights of the congregation I grew up in. And then as I got older, other traditions came about as a teenager, as a young adult, and on and on. And yet, for all the good our traditions can bring, we must be careful, right? For as we are all creatures of habit, we can turn tradition into an idol, right? These traditions always mean well, but do our traditions ever cause harm? When we break tradition, we start to point fingers. Right? We start to close our hearts off to the good news in favor of the accepted tradition. I didn't read it, but I'm going to share some of this now with you. Isaiah chapter 58. This is the Old Testament text for today. And God reminds the people through these prophetic words from Isaiah. "If you remove the yoke from among you, the finger pointing, the wicked speech, if you open your heart to the hungry and provide abundantly for those who are afflicted, your light will shine in the darkness, and your gloom will be like the noon. The Lord will guide you continually and provide for you, even in parched places. He will rescue your bones. You will be like a watered garden, like a spring of water that won't run dry." Isaiah 58, 9 through 11. God sees that we can let our good intentions and our traditions get in the way of the gospel being experienced in its fullness. These traditions and good order can, on many occasions, blind us to our own bigotry. Right? We could lose sight of the importance of relationships and wholeness when we unquestioningly move on with our traditions. We start to point fingers at each other when we break tradition. We start to uphold the tradition or the practice as the idol that we are called to avoid. The bent over woman in our gospel today, Luke 13, was shamed for not coming back tomorrow or the day after that, right? Or any other day of the week except the Sabbath day. I mean, God says, right? It's in the commandments, remember the Sabbath and keep it holy. But do you remember how long she'd been ill? 18 years. Not only that, her importance is lifted up because she's a daughter of Abraham, right? So there's this tension that Jesus lifts up. But here they are pointing to one of their own people, if you will, and even one of their own people is shamed for not coming back on another day. Right? Just imagine that. Even though today is a great opportunity, not today. No healings today, please. Sorry, we're closed. Come back tomorrow. We want you to be healed, just not today. Healing in the time of Jesus was seen on occasion. So I think the healing itself isn't totally what surprised them, although that was wonderful news. That's not the only thing that happened here. There's two other things that I see here. At least two other things, right? Jesus is bringing this person back into community, right? They're not able to experience the fullness of community because in that time, illnesses, crippled bodies were seen to be the result of sin or wrongdoing, right? We don't see it that way anymore, but that was part of how folks with disabilities were characterized in those days. But more importantly, the second point I want to lift up is that Jesus was pointing out the hypocrisy of the faith community, right? He pointed out their lack of joy in another person's freedom, right? Jesus says she'll be set free. So it's important that she's healed, but she's also in this way set free. To me, God is saying there is a better way, folks, and that is the way of grace and mercy. The way of grace and mercy provides for fullness in the self when the focus is on the other. There's a famous theologian who passed away recently, Frederick Buechner. This is one of his most used quotes in the world. The place God calls you to is the place where your deep gladness and the world's deep hunger meet. I'll say that again. The place God calls you to is the place where your deep gladness and the world's deep hunger meet. And so, we take what God has given us, our gifts, our callings, our skills, and we quite often pervert it. We turn inward on ourselves, right? We mean well, but when we make these traditions in our lives, in our faith communities, and we uphold them for the sake of tradition, we might even think that we're honoring God by following some of those traditions. But if we fail to revisit the reason why those traditions exist, then we fail not only God, but we fail our neighbor. The people in Isaiah's time, going back to our first lesson, the people in Isaiah's time, they were only trying to honor God by protecting the Sabbath, right? But we can look at this Isaiah text and realize that we're off base a little bit. Right? Here's the continuation of the Isaiah text. I read to you Isaiah 58 verses 9 through 11, but now I'm jumping to Isaiah 58, 13 and 14. It says this: if you stop trampling the Sabbath, stop doing whatever you want on my holy day, and consider the Sabbath a delight, sacred to the Lord, honored, and honor it instead of doing things your way, seeking what you want and doing business as usual, then you will take delight in the Lord. So, trampling the Sabbath means you're doing whatever you want, right? Instead, you're called to honor the Sabbath instead of doing things your way or doing business as usual. These days, we worship on the Sabbath, right? We praise God on Sunday, and Jesus healed on the Sabbath. So what is the right thing to do? Look, folks, the gospel will always be the gospel, whether we uphold it or not. The gospel does not depend on us. The good news will always be the good news. And that's good news. The good news doesn't need our help. Instead, we take it for a ride our whole lives long. When it comes to doing ministry, we find where our passions and the world's hunger meet. We take one step in that direction, and we reevaluate, and we try again. On September 11th, 2022, God's Work Our Hands Sunday. What are you doing to honor your neighbor on that day, to be God's hands in the world? We find where our passions meet the world's hunger. We go that direction. So now may you seek to let the gospel drive your decisions this day and every day. Consider that and contemplate on that within your faith community, with your family, and with the strangers you might encounter this week. Amen.